I want to welcome all of our amazing guests on the Freedom Riders Freedom Forum today. We know that we have teachers and students, passionate parents from every city, community, continent around the globe. And so I'm expecting this to be a really robust discussion. Have your Kleenex handy. I got a little emotional just fielding questions before we began. But you are in for a real treat at the perfect time with the perfect person. They often say that people come into our lives for a reason, a season, or a lifetime. I'd like to believe that our guest today, Patrick Kennedy, is in my life and the Freedom Riders' lives for a reason and a lifetime. We've known him for over 20 years. He's been an advocate, a champion for change, and our North Star. And as our story has evolved, so has he. He has been a fierce fighter for mental health parity. And so our discussion today is going to be just that, stripping away stigmas and stereotypes and learning to be inclusive and accepting and to have a better world in this new normal that is anything but. So I want to give you a little bit about this amazing man who I call a friend and a colleague, and then I'm going to introduce him to all of you. He is part of a dynasty, and he often says that his birth was accidental and a lottery. And being born into the Kennedy family gave him privilege and power. But he is an advocate for the most vulnerable among us, and I love that about him, that he is sensitive to people that don't have a voice. So within the next hour, Patrick exclusively will give a voice to the voiceless and hope to hopeless. So it is an honor and a privilege to introduce my friend, a former congressman, an incredible author. If you have not read his book, it is exquisite and a page turner. And he is also an advocate for any of you who are suffering with mental health. You no longer have to suffer in silence. So without further ado, it is an honor to introduce Patrick Kennedy. Hi, Patrick.
Hey, Erin. Thank you so much for that generous introduction. You know why I keep coming on anytime you invite me on. It's because you say so many nice things about me. So I figure
it's true.
Good for the soul, right?
It's true. Well, what I should have said is the Freedom Riders who met you 20 years plus, they have a special nickname for Patrick. So for any of you rap aficionados out there, they call him Master P. I am their Miss G and he's Master P. So we're a little bit folksy, but I was trying to clean it up a little bit because you're talking about something that is so important. So what I'd like to do to begin with is I want to start with what is it like to be a child growing up with a name like Kennedy in the state of Massachusetts, going back and forth to Washington, D.C. when your father was a senator. What is that like to be a kid under that umbrella?
Well, I was asked after my father died, what it was like growing up in our home. And of course, in life, there's peeling the layers of the onion back. And I haven't peeled the layers of the onion back in my whole life until I got into recovery from drug addiction and alcohol. And over the last several years that I've been in recovery, I've had the ability to look back and have more insight into what was going on as I was growing up. Many people who aren't as fortunate as those of us who are in recovery do not get off the treadmill in life, and they have very little time to step back and look at their life kind of from a distance to see the bigger things that are creating the environment in which they're growing up in. And for me, I took for granted a lot of things that other people were like, I can't believe you went through that. And to me, like many of the folks that are listening and follow the good work that you do and the Freedom Riders do, until you have a chance to look and have your own introspection and understand where you're coming from, you don't even appreciate a lot of the time all the trauma that may be going on. And of course, I never thought of myself, as a victim. And of course, furthest from that, I had all of the benefits of having grown up in a very well-to-do family and all the rest, but it didn't shield me from the kind of family trauma that mental health and addiction creates in a family, which is very traumatic. And you can have all the money in the world, but that money doesn't protect you. It's not a, quote, protective factor. It helps you in many respects insulate yourself more than most, but it doesn't shield you altogether. And when I was thinking about growing up, I didn't grow up in a home where there were gunshots and drug dealing, on every corner. But we had bulletproof vests in every one of our closets in our house. And we had people with all kinds of semi-automatic guns all around our house. We had lights focused outside the house so that at nighttime they could all be on in case anyone came at us from the woods, that they would be identified. Now, that's quite a home alarm system. Mm-hmm. That's not your average, ATT or where you, have surveillance cameras. This was, we had people like in station wagons sitting with major firearms underneath their jackets, and they would sit in the front of our driveway for anybody who tried to come in. So we were protected, but at the same time, it creates a little bit of a fear that, it's like you have your own fallout shelter in your own closet because that's where you know to run and put on a bulletproof vest. And that combined with the fact that, the images of the Kennedy family often center around, obviously, the tragic assassinations of my two uncles. And both of those assassinations have been years, 50 years. And so the images of that as someone who's growing up in that family and then who goes over and plays with their cousins, who, by the way, don't have a father because their father was murdered, how much of that I was conscious of. As I said, I haven't always been aware until I got into recovery and started to see that there were a lot of things that weren't kind of normal. And the kind of post-traumatic stress that my father experienced watching his brothers murdered, both brothers. And I just think that, my mother already suffering from alcoholism, who had a huge mood disorder on top of that, Great Depression of, these things have a cumulative effect. And so I might not be able to have people relate to my experience because it seems pretty otherworldly to be a Kennedy. But I go to recovery meetings, and when I just tell the stories that I tell in terms of who I am and what impacted me and how I fight to stay in recovery, people from all walks of life, ironically, can identify, because I'm not talking about JFK, RFK. I'm not talking about the assassinations, I'm talking about what goes on in a family and how what goes on in the family is unspoken. And if it's trauma or a mood disorder or an addiction, it's not spoken of in a family, especially if that family is concerned about its public image, which undoubtedly part of my family brand is its public face. And the thought of recognizing and addressing what's going on inside the family, it can't be done because you have to worry about how it might get out and affect the outside picture of the family. So when I start talking in general terms, people say to me, hold on, Patrick, you know what? My family may not be a big, widely known, celebrated political family, but I totally get that. You know, in my family, no one knew our name, but we all knew to be super quiet and super secret with what went on in our family because we always feared what other people would think of us, even though, you know, we didn't have all that kind of celebrity that you had. And in a sense, we could then identify with the fact that it doesn't matter what family you come from, we're all kind of prisoner and held hostage by the need to try to marry what's going on inside with us to what's happening outside, and frankly the big disconnect that often happens in between. So that's a long way of answering your question, what it's like to come from a celebrated family like the Kennedy family.
What I appreciate about you, though, is, you know, for us, the word family is our theme. The Freedom Riders put the word fun into dysfunctional family. But as you know, the Freedom Riders have been a family for over 20 years. And when I had the opportunity to meet your father and especially your mother, what resonated with me about you was how tender you were in protecting both your mother, who was an accomplished woman, your father, who was a state senator, but how honest you were with me in the way that Freedom Riders were honest in writing their story. And there was moments in our early friendship that I thought, I don't know if I should know this. You know, I've read the books, I've watched the movies, and Patrick is sharing things with me that I'm not sure that the world knows. And so the fact that you had to go through life being a secret bearer, what does that do to a teenager to push things down and push things away when you realize that there are stigmas and stereotypes with sharing some of those secrets?
Well, you know, everyone who is able to make it through a little bit into recovery begins to understand how alcoholism and addiction is a family disease. In other words, everybody is implicated by it. And everyone gets put into a very dysfunctional situation in order to accommodate the elephant that is shitting all over the room, right? And yet your whole family is supposed to ignore it and tiptoe around it as if the elephant's not there. Yeah. So, you know, that is very destructive on yourself when you are what they call co-signing that BS. And you're somehow thinking that, well, that's their business, it's not your business. But no, these people are your loved ones. Of course it's your business. But people who suffer from these illnesses are so self-centered, myself included, that they don't often appreciate how their behavior affects others because they're only worrying about how they feel and how they're going to make themselves feel better. And so, as I said, I'm lucky to be in recovery because it helps me have a little bit of insight as to how damaging and toxic your insides can be if you come from an alcoholic family. And so it affects everybody. And I think there are things in 12-step recovery called adult children of alcoholics. And I've been to a number of those meetings as well as Al-Anon meetings. And I'm in another 12-step meeting for my own recovery. But I would say they all introduce this idea that is foreign for those of us who grow up in a dysfunctional home. And that is that it's all right to be intimate, to trust, to be vulnerable, to make mistakes, to not be perfect all the time, to not be sized up and dismissed and judged for any mistakes you make, like that's who you are because you made that mistake. And that's not normal. I mean, it may be something that happens in the normal course of events in a lot of families in America, but it's not what ought to be. What ought to be is that parents are being unconditional in their love and their support. And unconditional means unconditional. Like, you've got that sense that no matter what, they've got your back. But if they can't identify what's going on in their lives, it's hard for them to be able to be that all in on you as their child. So I would say that's the big issue for a young person growing up in a family where there's alcoholism or addiction.
I think what Freedom Riders learned, and what you also model, is that often family is what we make and family is what we choose. So we need that sense of permanency, or that sense that even if I am a saboteur, I'm not going to sabotage this particular relationship. So in honor of you being a guest today, I want to share something very sweet. There is a Freedom Rider teacher who loves on her kids. Social distancing doesn't mean that she can't still have the love distancing. And she invited 6 of her students to join us today. They're watching right now. I want to do a shout out for them, because everything that you're saying may have touched their families. A beautiful teenage girl named Nellie, a beautiful girl named Rakia, and 4 unbelievable young men, Isaac, Ezekiel, Rusty, and Davion. These 4 young men and 2 beautiful women have had some struggles, and this pandemic has really poked and prodded on their sense of stability. And wonderful people want to be a part of a committed family. Lizette and Leanne Harris said, we've heard that these young people, some of whom are in foster care, have had no access to technology in the middle of a pandemic. So for 8 weeks, their learning has not been connecting with the outside world. So these incredible folks who believe that family is what we choose went out and got computers for these 6 beautiful kids that I just mentioned, who are watching, who can connect with you now, who can be a part of an educational system that often has a divide. They didn't know they were getting computers, so they're watching live, and suddenly it's like an Oprah moment. You get a computer, you get a computer. So Patrick, if you could look at Nellie and Rakia and Isaac and Ezekiel and Rusty and Davion, what would be the gift of education that you would want them to explore with technology, the gift of education with having a voice, the gift of knowing they're not alone? What could you suggest for these 6 incredible kids?
Well, all I can say is, first of all, congratulations, and thank you, Freedom Riders, and their teacher and the people that love them. They're going to be all right in spite of all of their challenges. I would say you're going to be all right because you have people who love you. And as I said, they don't have to be biological. You know, we all know that the only thing a child needs is a trusted, loving adult in their life. And that could be a teacher. It could be some sort of other adult who is in their life, and mentor of some kind. That's what they really need. We all spend our lives searching to try to fill that disconnect, the quote unquote hole in the soul. And there's these young people that you've just talked about. They clearly have huge kind of holes in their soul because they are living in such challenging circumstances that most of us can't even dream of in terms of how difficult it is. But they have people reaching out. And as you started your Freedom Diaries and the Freedom Rider with, the looking back in World War II and thinking about Anne Frank, who had nothing, and they were coming for her, and the Nazis were gonna get her, but she had that diary as her way of connecting. These computers are going to be your diary. It's going to be your opportunity to communicate who you are to your friends, to adults, to the people you need to have understand you. Because we all know that the challenges that you're going through are things that we don't understand. But it's kind of a challenge for you to help make us understand so that we can better appreciate what we can do to help you. Because you deserve, as human beings, as children of God, you deserve to have all that you need in terms of dignity and respect. And dignity and respect means you shouldn't have to go hungry. Dignity and respect means you should have health care. Dignity and respect means you should have a stable living situation. Dignity and respect means you should be accepted in your community and celebrated and loved for who you are. That's what it means. And these computers are a way for you to be able to start to claim that for yourself. And so I'm so happy for all of you for getting these computers.
Well, I knew I was going to get weepy. I just didn't know I'd get weepy this soon. So forget about it. I'll just keep crying for the next 40 minutes. What I love about being your friend is I've seen you in action. When you were a congressman, I got to go to your community. When you were an author, I got to promote your book. And what you don't realize is even just being on our podcast, that what you have done for people is you make them feel that you're speaking directly at them. So you could be looking at a screen, but you're speaking to Ezekiel. We did a podcast, and you were so transparent. And there was a gentleman who wrote us a letter that was exquisite. He lives across the globe. He lives in Australia. His name is Pat. And he literally pulled to the side of the road to finish your podcast. And I just want to read you a paragraph. It's so beautiful that you don't know the effect that you have on people. He said, "Patrick, you possibly saved my life." I'm not even going to bury the lead. That is the lead. Patrick, you possibly saved my life. You see, I've been an angry man all of my life. I turned to alcohol by the age of 10, drugs by 13, and my life would be a haze of drugs and alcohol for many more years to come. At 55, I'm now sober, but I still have an issue, anger, along with a sense of not knowing where I belong. I've never listened to any podcast before, but recently I found the Freedom Riders podcast while I was driving listening to Patrick Kennedy. The subject of mental health almost forced me to stop the car. It was like you hit me with a lightning bolt. The more you spoke, Patrick, the more I cried. It was the most powerful piece I've ever listened to. At the end of the podcast, I called my friend and admitted to her and to myself that I needed help. I immediately called the doctor, and now I'm on medication. It's still very early. I don't know where this will lead, but I wanted to say once again, you saved my life. What does that feel like when somebody across the globe in Australia just hears the cadence of your story, your truth, your narrative, unvarnished, uncensored, and you compel them to seek help? How does that make you feel?
Well, I'm happy for Pat, and if he ever gets to listen to this, I want him to know I can't wait to meet him, and he's very generous and giving me credit for sparking that, but it's clear to me these things kind of are already under the surface, and if one of us can kind of help bring it to the surface, that's it's great to be part of that, but but these things don't happen unless the person themselves is in a place where it's somewhere in them they really want it to happen. And oftentimes people will say, "Oh, that person is, I wouldn't be sober if it wasn't for that person. I wouldn't be sober." It's not that. You are sober because you are sober. And by the grace of God, with God's help, you are sober. And then there are a lot of people who can be enormously influential in helping you maximize your opportunity to stay sober. But no one should give that away. And if Pat is able to do this one day at a time, he's already got it because he said it's early and I'm not sure how things are going to be. That's all he needs to know. I mean, I'm fortunate now. I never thought I'd be able to put through a couple of string of years together, February 22nd, 2011, and to now, and it's, over 9 years. And I never even expected it was going to, ultimately come to that number. And it just happened slowly. And I still feel like I'm just some days getting it, some days not. But it's all just today. And it sounds so simple, but as they say, Erin, as you know, the simplest things are often the hardest things. And the simplest things are being aware of what helped you not get lost and fall off the track. And helping others is the way you stay connected because it reminds you where you are. When he was talking about drinking early, drugging early, living through many years in a haze, I totally get that. And that's why I love going to 12-step recovery because I meet people like him every day, and I live my life with people like him every day. I had my Zoom meeting this morning at 7:30, and these are people I've been in recovery with for nearly a decade, and they're from all walks of life, and I've got a busy life. I'm trying to, help my wife get elected to Congress. She's running against singularly one of the worst members of Congress, and she's a terrific candidate. But I'm saying, like, I have to make time for my recovery, and I don't know how just going to that hour meeting is going to change my life today, but it does. It just grounds me enough to know that I haven't got this life figured out. And just like Pat doesn't have it figured out, or any of us have it figured out. So I appreciate that very, very kind message. And that's why he's going to be helpful to others, because he was selfless enough to write that nice note. That says a lot about him. Yeah. Instead of like dismissing that, not bothering to say, "Oh, thank you for helping me." His acknowledgement of my small part that I helped him with is his generosity of spirit that's underneath. So he should recognize that. For him to reach out beyond his comfort zone while he's in the middle of his own recovery, to be thinking, I need to say thank you to Patrick Kennedy, that across the world. What kind of spiritual person is that? So I would say to him, he's a very spiritual person, that he was not so wrapped up in himself that he just moved on and thought, oh, that's going to take me 20 minutes out of my day to write that note, and then I got to put postage, and then I got to do an email. And he was thinking about someone else, and that's the key to recovery. He's going to do well in recovery.
There's a cliche that when the student is ready, the teacher will arrive. And you are a teacher for so many people. You are the light. And there was a moment in time, someone I dearly love, he knows who he is. He's my number one. and he had fallen. And I picked up the phone and I called you in a moment of panic. And I said, I just need you to be a sponsor for a moment. I'll go to meetings with him. If I was to have a biological son, I would want him to be my son. And making that phone call to you was scary because I thought, are you going to pick up the phone? You picked it up immediately. I handed the phone over to this incredible young man. And once again, because of you and walking the walk and talking the talk, this young man is also one day at a time. So you are a teacher. I know your wonderful wife is a teacher, and she needs to get into the halls of Congress to teach those folks. So we'll do anything we can to help her.
There's a lot of schooling.
There's a lot of schooling that needs to be done. Speaking of schooling, I fielded some questions, Patrick, that I want to queue up for you, of kids like Pat and my number one who listened to your podcast or read your book and were drawn to ask you a question in the now, during a pandemic. And this is a really thoughtful question for a little girl who lives in Omaha, Nebraska. Her teacher, Carrie Palmisano, brags about her. She's going to get a full ride scholarship to Columbia University next year. And her name is Aisha. And Aisha said, she talked about the percentages that oftentimes almost 60% of people don't seek the services because of stigmas and stereotypes. And she said, even though there's access, people often avoid it because of those labels, because they don't want to be labeled mentally ill. So her question to you, Patrick, is even if mental health treatments are more accessible to everyone, what will be done to tackle stigmas pertaining to mental health that also sometimes are the reasons why people don't reach out for help to begin with? So how do we get rid of those stigmas so that Aisha can help friends and family in need?
Well, thank you, Aisha, from Nebraska, and congratulations on the incredible recognition. And it's such an exciting time in your life and the life of this country that we have sensitive young people like you who are already thinking about how you can help improve the lives of others, and with the kind of brains that God gave you to also have the heart and the spirit to go with it, because we all know that just having a good intellect is not enough that is needed in this world. We need to have smart people, but who are guided by the right values. And it's clear to me that you have both. And I tell a story, and the story is that I was honored to speak at my uncle's special warfare school in North Carolina, and it was Fort Bragg. And on the campus of Fort Bragg is a John F. Kennedy Special Warfare School, and that's where they train all of our Green Berets. And, you're kind of our Green Beret of sorts with your ability to have all these skills and awarenesses. And they said to me when I toured it, they said, don't you know, Congressman Kennedy, that our Green Berets have more mental health delivery and therapy than any other branch of the service? And I said to myself, Green Berets don't need mental health care. They jump out of airplanes and dive in the water, and they hold their breath 5 miles, and then they come out on the beach and they speak 5 languages, and then they take out their target and they're at home reading to their kids by dinner time. I mean, these people don't need mental health. And the commander on the base said to me, Congressman, you've got it wrong. And that's pretty interesting that anyone in the military would tell someone on the Armed Services Committee whose uncle's name is on the building. He said, I got it wrong. And he said, because we don't look at mental health as something for weak people. We look at mental health as a force multiplier. Force multiplier. I said, force multiplier. What are you talking about? I thought mental health was just for people who really can't hack it, who are, just don't have the wherewithal, their personal fortitude to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and just get over it. And he said, that's not mental health. He said, mental health is getting whatever you need, wherever you need it, on the spectrum of whatever your challenges are, so that you can overcome those challenges and perform at your optimal level. And I'm like, oh my God. No wonder they call these special forces. He said, all kinds of folks with very able bodies could run the obstacle courses. He said, but they're not the ones that become Green Berets. He said, we need people who can think analytically, who can take into account a number of different pieces of information, who will not act out in reflexive, reactionary way, but who can rather mediate their feelings. Who would think Green Berets are taught to mediate their feelings so that when they're in the field of battle, they are allowed to move in the field of battle without having intrusive thoughts. Like, those intrusive thoughts in their head could mean the difference, life or death, of one of their colleagues on a mission, which is super sensitive and needs everybody doing their part. And I was just being schooled at this point, Erin, just like we talked about. I was being schooled because for the life of me, I never appreciated that mental health was anything but for people who are already really over the edge, right? And that's part of the reason why people don't seek mental health, is that it's just perceived and they say, well, I'm not over that far, right? I can handle it. When, like other areas of medicine, we catch your problem early in the rest of medicine. But in mental health, we let you go all the way to the end before we get you help. And I say to folks, and it's captured in my friend Paul Gianfrido, who's head of Mental Health America, he said, we need to do this before stage 4. In other words, when cancer hits, we don't say, oh, you got cancer, come back in 6 months and we'll see how that thing goes. No, that's not what we do. We said, we got to get you in right now, because the best chance we have for you to thrive and survive is to get early intervention. Same has to be true for mental health. And unfortunately, states like Nebraska, Oklahoma, other states, they don't have very good budgets for mental health. I know because I've been there. There are some of the urban centers have some great leaders and philanthropies where they're raising some money to help supplement. But mental health shouldn't be something for philanthropy. Mental health ought to be part of health, where, it's part of the overall healthcare delivery system. It's not something we have to raise money and pass the hat to provide. You don't do that for the rest of healthcare. So why do it for mental health? So that's a long way of saying that to bust stigma, get people to avail themselves of mental health earlier, we need to, especially post-COVID, say this is what everybody needs. Some need more intervention than others. I take that. But no one is immune from the trauma, the stress, the dislocation that comes from COVID-19. Everybody is impacted some way or another. And I think, Erin, to Aisha's question, I think that we're going to have a new normal after this new normal, and that is that mental health isn't going to be as stigmatized as it is going into COVID, because now everybody is going to have to deal with some aspect of it. Even if they're very healthy people with great resiliency, they can't help but feel some uncertainty, anxiety, depression. Now, those might not pathologize into debilitating conditions like it will for many, but everybody will identify with this. I'm convinced by the time this is all over.
I don't know if you know, when I first met you, I met you with my brother. And my brother went to Fort Bragg. My brother was in the Special Forces. And after serving in both Somalia and Bosnia, my brother suffered. And so I thank you for touching on that, for anyone who has served and sacrificed. So thank you for honoring that. This question got snuck into my stack, and when I read it, I burst into tears then. I might burst into tears now. You have met this beautiful young woman. She is a freedom writer. Her name is Sue Ellen, and she says, as a role model for students, as a freedom writer, she's on the cover of our book, and she's traveled the country telling her story. She says, as a role model to students, I try to be open about my bipolar 2 diagnosis and how it affects my life. I feel that it's essential to show people that life can be messy at times and to be open about difficulties and the importance of taking care of oneself. My question for you, Patrick, is I'm still on the path to learning how to take care of myself, but what are some ways that you can help provide for people that need to know about self-care?
The number one, don't put too many expectations on yourself on how to get through the day. So Sue Ellen, I thank you for being a role model. And this is now a new dimension of your being a role model, that you can bring this question out and that you can lead through your own experience and storytelling to other kids. Like, you're no longer a kid, but to the kids that you're a model to, that this is part of life. And so I would just say that I cannot be good at caring for myself pretty much on a regular basis if I wasn't plugged in to having a whole cadre of friends like you, Erin, in my world, because I've been in this mental health advocacy space for a long time, and I've wrapped myself in it professionally, if you will, with the work that I do today in trying to support and invest in companies that are trying to meet the needs in this space. But the benefit of being around it is I hear it chirping in my ear all the time. Be good to yourself. Be good to yourself. Take care of yourself. Self-care, self-care, self-care. And I'll be part of these meetings. Like, I was on this Zoom call earlier, and they were talking about self-care. So be good. Don't raise expectations on yourself. And I have to tell you, if I were like Patrick and I didn't have this, I would not be getting these messages like 24/7, because like I'm quote unquote a mental health leader. Right? I'm like plugged in. I have to speak at this conference. And the problem of speaking at this conference and this conference is that before I get up and speak, I have to listen to the person who goes before me. And even if I catch a few minutes of what they say, if they're speaking at some big conference, I'm like getting reminded of the things that I need to know, even though I'm supposed to know this already because it's already been drilled into my head a million times. But the challenge with the chronic disease of addiction and mental illness is that it lies to you. You're okay, you're okay, you're okay. And that's the thing that you've got to guard against. And the only way to do that is to constantly be around people who are reminding you, and who also, as I said earlier with Pat, who is from Australia, who identify with you so that you can't feel as if you're a quote loser because you're comparing apples to oranges. But if you're apples to apples and someone else who has bipolar 2 says, holy crap, I know just what you're dealing with, and it ain't that bad. You know what? In fact, if you do this and this, you don't have to find out what I found out when I did not, take care of myself by, doing a regular, hygiene of sleeping enough, eating right, loving enough, laughing enough, talking or connecting enough, listening enough, exercising enough, and taking your medication when you're supposed to. Like, these are all the things that you kind of got to juggle. And you know what? It's not just taking the medication. And I'm on an antidepressant, an anticonvulsant, and an antipsychotic. I've got like 3 different categories of medications to help keep me kind of on track. And I have to tell you, I need everything I can to keep me on track. But I'm lucky that in addition to cognitive behavioral therapy, which comes from going to 12-step recovery and having a therapist and doing the work and having a family, I don't have to also contend with a brain chemistry issue that can totally kick my ass and knock me off track. So my point here is that self-care, you can kind of let some things fall away here and there, but by and large, our challenge is to do more than the fine medication regimen adherence. It's adherence to all of these other things that, frankly, the medical world doesn't understand. But it's the spiritual dimension, which comes from social engagement and support. And it's the spiritual dimension of doing what you're doing, and that is self-identifying and asking how other people are doing, and then thereby getting relief from your own challenges, such that you can ask other people who know about you, but you know about them, and you know that they've got similar challenges maybe with bipolar. And you can say, hey, how's it going for you? And then all of a sudden they'll say a bunch of things, and you know what? Automatically it'll be like hitting you right where you need. And that is that I'm not alone. Somewhere deep inside that, that's not me. You know, it's the crowd in my head that's arguing. You know, I don't have to listen to that crowd. I can, take these suggestions from someone else who's also walked this path, and this is what I need to do. That's what peer support is all about. And anyway, I think it's a good thing. Question for being asked.
I love how you give dignity and honor to something that often is something where people are silenced and suffer with that silence. There's another question from a high school student on the East Coast near you. I know you're in New Jersey. Her teacher, Megan Abruzzo, introduced me to this beautiful student named Sam. And Sam goes to a school in the BOCES program where looking at mental health is important, social emotional needs. And her fear is, now that she is home, that not everybody is getting loved on by a school or a parent. And I know that having a wife that's a teacher, you understand that social emotional learning so well with Amy being a history teacher. So Sam asked you specifically, Patrick, what suggestion do you have for a teen like myself? Some of my friends are in group homes or in less than ideal home situations who have been diagnosed with mental illnesses. How do we get used to this new normal? Now that there's restrictions and no escape and no safe space for us to go to, what kinds of things can we do as teenagers to survive?
So there was this, I think Sam got the right sentiment. It's challenging times, especially when you're challenged on top of already being challenged. Yeah. But my answer would be like, there used to be that ad, the most successful ad against drug use from the drug partnership, whatever, years ago was above the influence. Above the influence was the ad campaign. The reason it was so successful is that often teenagers, young people will want to rebel, and they'll do what they're not supposed to do, drink and drug and all of that stuff. But the above the influence is, you don't want to drink and drug because that's what the corporations want you to do, because you know, the new marijuana industry is selling you on that's going to be all right. It's just, natural herb. But really, they just want to sell more cartridges with, THC. Alcohol is going to be saying, hard lemonade, you can get. But really, they're trying to hook people who are underage so they can get them as consumers. And of course, they'll say, drink responsibly, but they don't make their money off of those that drink responsibly. They make money off of people like me who drink irresponsibly. So all I would say is what I loved about Above the Influence is that teenagers, young people are rebellious. So a great way to be rebellious is to be part of this first generation. We're tabula rasa now, post-COVID-19. We're a whole new world. This new world is going to be defined by the people who define it themselves. And so they've got to, like your brother, they've got to armor up. And they may not be given all the social emotional learning skills, that they get from some of their teachers, like the ones that are plugged into your program. But they have initiative. They're survivors. They can look this stuff up. They're better than me in operating a computer. They can go and what do I need? Like my kids and I, we camped out last week, and my kid said, "Can we camp out, Daddy?" I said, "All right, but you have to make a list of all the things that we need." And all of a sudden, the rest of the day, their eyes are wide open. They're drawing on their list. They're using crayons. We need a flashlight. Oh, we need this. And it was fun because now they had to think about how are they going to do this. It wasn't just popping the tent and rolling out the sleeping bags. Like, what is it going to entail? So I said, "Did you check the weather?" Oh, and so all of a sudden they were like on Alexa, Alexa, what's the weather gonna be tomorrow? It's training our brains to think a little bit like we've got a plan for the storm. We've got a plan for, in this case, this is in a very, playful way of planning. But teaching those skills, they don't come naturally. But if you're resilient, you've got a teacher who's helping guide you a little bit, and you've got others that are, frankly, as I said, already going through the obstacle course. It's like teen ninjas, okay? Teen ninjas. You see these kids and they can jump on this and they jump on this and well, these kids that Sam is a part of are teen ninjas. They got to think of themselves as teen ninjas, because now instead of that kind of physical obstacle course, they've got an even bigger obstacle course to navigate. And those are all of the traumas and challenges and the lack of access to each other and the ability to connect here. How are they going to survive? It's a big test, but they'll be stronger for it. But they have to prepare, and they have to take some ownership and have some of their own agency in about going and taking on their own challenges and then the outside challenges and saying, you know what, I'm not going to let this, I'm going to rise above the influence. Mm-hmm. No one expects me to do this. It would be easy for me to fall through the cracks. It would be easy for me to be a victim of everything that's going on. But I'm not going to let that happen to myself, because I'm not going to let that happen to myself. Mm. That's like a big turning point for kids in this environment. And I think it can be a positive experience if we frame it that way.
Amazing. I have an interesting question from a teacher in Westmoreland, New York. He's a math teacher, and he wanted to be very sensitive to how we deal with the way we discuss and communicate about mental health. So he said, so many students and family members may be at the point to reach out for someone for help and understanding in the field of mental health. But many people have good intentions, and yet their responses in the long run could actually do some damage rather than good. So his question for you is, what are some of the best responses to give a person who is reaching out for help? And what are phrases and words that we might want to avoid and that we don't do more damage than good?
So in recovery, we call it a promotion, a program of attraction, not promotion. I get people all the time when I'm at events and they line up at the microphone and they all tell me stories about someone in their family or someone in their office or someone that they're close to needing help, and how it breaks their heart, and that, you know, they're often crying or by the end of it, and they're so wound up about it. And they said, could you help me get them help? And then they'll come up after the event and they'll say, where should they go? What should they do? And I say, time out. You need help. And it's not, I'm convinced that if you learn about how to help yourself when you're living with someone with mental illness or addiction who doesn't know yet that they need help or how to get help, you're going to be a much better help to them in getting plugged in, because you're going to be doing it from a space where they're not going to feel judged, because you're going to have your own shit in order, so to speak, right? And you're not going to be projecting a judgment that you might not be saying, but someone who is vulnerable, they're going to be feeling, unless you're coming in there like ninja warrior, like, you know, Karate Kid. I've got a clear head. I'm not like, I'm able to meet you where you are and make sure that, you know, you understand the best opportunities for yourself. And by the way, I'm going to do what I can to be most productive and helpful to you in getting that help. But you can't do that if you come in and you've got all kinds of toxicity spilling out of you, because it's hard to live with someone who has a mental illness or addiction. It's easy if you're a family member or friend to feel pretty burned by people who have these illnesses, because when you have one of these illnesses, you're pretty selfish, self-centered. You really have a general disregard for others, even though you have no clue that that's the case. So you're a pretty unsympathetic soul. So it's hard to have any empathy, sympathy for those people. You know, those people. Listen to my own language here. And so unless you're conscious of that, you're going to just be spilling that out. It's like read between the lines, right? You know, the caption, you'll be saying one thing and they'll be reading another. So, you know, my advice would be, if people kind of get a little bit of their own personal checkup from the neck up, you know, queuing in with others to also get advice. And, you know, there's groups like Al-Anon where their families and all those other families have coped with the same challenges, all varying degrees, but you'll find people that you can ask for advice from. And it's the best kind of advice. It's not the calling up a therapist and asking for advice, although that can be helpful. It's going to someone with lived experience and saying, how did you finally get your loved one into treatment? And have them tell the story.
What I love about our friendship is that it's ever evolving. And what I'd like to say to everyone that's watching today, I have a dozen more questions that I could have asked Patrick. And
for the next one,
there will be a next one. There's a ... So my homework assignment for everyone, I can do that because I'm a teacher, and Patrick is married to a teacher, so he knows about homework assignments. My homework assignment to everyone that is listening is to pull somebody a little closer. And I know that may be virtually because of this pandemic. But what Patrick did was he pierced a veil. What Patrick did is he was able to shine a light. What Patrick did is he allowed us to not just be active listeners, but to have courageous conversations. And so I just want to say thank you, Patrick, because I got to be a student today. You know, my role is often as a teacher, but I know that these questions that I fielded came from a place of pain or a place of celebration. And I want to say thank you for seeing them, for celebrating them, for knowing their name, for giving them dignity. And I honor you as a friend, as a civil rights activist, as a teacher who believes that everyone should have courageous conversations. So my homework assignment for all of us is to go out and talk to somebody, to really listen, to be an advocate in the way that Patrick is. And Patrick, I cannot thank you enough. I hope, as you did with that podcast, as you did with your book, you saved some lives today. They saved their own life, but maybe you were the opening, that little beacon that they needed. So thank you for spending this hour with us. Thank you for changing my life and those that I hold dear, and I honor you that.
Well, you've got great spirit and great love, and that's so self-evident in everybody that knows you, Erin, and that's why you've been able to touch so many people and drive what you've been able to drive in terms of positive change in the life of our country and around the world. And Dr. King said we're all caught in an inescapable web of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. What affects one directly affects all indirectly. You are living that type of legacy that no one is outside the garment. We're all tied together, and I love being part of that with you and all of the family that we've had on this call. So look forward to the next time. ...
Family is what we make. Family is what we choose. So we say adieu to our family. Thank you for spending this courageous hour with us. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Bye.
Bye.